Next up, we have Ricky Castro, who is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, Chicago. So thanks, Ricky.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. All right, thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. Hope everybody's having a good day. So I'm just gonna take the next couple minutes just to run through what we do in terms of Lakeshore flood services here at the National Weather Service office, and so we're just the office that serves the Northeast Illinois, far Northwest Indiana Lakeshore. So to our north, you have the Milwaukee Sullivan office, and to our east, you have Northern Indiana and also Grand Rapids on the east side of the lake. So we do similar things. So this is just pretty much an overview of what you would normally expect from in general from the NWS offices in terms of Lakeshore flood services. So next slide, please. So here are some of the topics I'll be hitting on Lakeshore flood products. So what are the headlines that we issue for that we hoist for Lakeshore flooding? Some just a basic overview of forecasting lakeshore flooding, and then a couple examples from last winter and spring, which had some pretty significant lakeshore flooding events, and then finally just summer hazards as pertains to the high lake level era that we're in now. Next slide, please. So the products that we issue for lakeshore flooding are Lakeshore Flood Watch. So you've heard of those for other headlines as well: severe weather, flooding, winter weather. So for lakeshore flooding, we issue a Lakeshore Flood Watch, Lakeshore Flood Warning, and an advisory for a little bit lower end flooding. And you can move on to the next slide as well. So for Lakeshore Flood Watch, if we're starting to hone in on the potential for significant lakeshore flooding and impacts from it that could pose a threat to life and or property, we'll issue that Lakeshore Flood Watch 24 to 48 hours in advance, sometimes earlier, if confidence is really high. And I'll touch briefly on that when I give one of the examples from last winter. You can move on to the next slide now, though. So for Lakeshore Flood Warning, that's when lakeshore flooding is imminent or occurring, and we'll issue that product typically 12 to 24 hours in advance. Could be a little bit earlier for very high confidence situations. And that's Lakeshore Flood Warning is the highest end lakeshore flooding that we would expect. Significant impacts, threat to life and property, would cause major erosion or exacerbation of ongoing erosion that's occurred due to the high lake levels. Could also cause possible flooding of roadways, some vulnerable areas of Lakeshore Drive, for instance, in Chicago, such as the S curve between Ohio Street and Oak Street. In Northwest Indiana, one of the areas that's been affected significantly is the town of Beverly Shores. I think it's called Lakefront Drive, if not mistaken, has had some very significant erosion and had to close the roads at times for these lakeshore flooding events that have occurred. And the approximate criteria that we use for these, when our wave model inputted with a wind forecast comes up with approximately 8 to 11 or 8 to 12 foot waves. That's the general criteria we've used for warning issuance. It could vary case by case, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, the forecasting, how that goes into it. And you could advance to the next slide. So for a Lakeshore Flood Advisory, similar time frame of issuance, generally 12 to 24 hours out, sometimes a little bit earlier. And that would be moderately impactful flooding, likely some exacerbation of erosion. Inundation issues, one of the most common areas that would experience inundation would be the Chicago lakefront bike path, especially the most vulnerable areas, such as that same S curve there, gets completely inundated. Another area that we've noted that tends to get inundated, even in the more moderate flooding events, is in the city of Whiting, Indiana. Their lakefront park tends to get inundated as well. And the approximate issuance criteria for these is generally 6 to 9 foot waves. Next slide, please. So forecasting lakeshore flooding, we're looking at waves which are driven by wind on the Great Lakes generally, because in the ocean it's a little bit different. You'll have tidal influences, the surge, and over the lake we generally are looking at wind driven waves. So And then the next component is going to be storm surge, which is a temporary rise in lake levels above the already where we're at right now near record highs. So the lake level actually goes above that due to piling up of the water. And you'll see that on the next slide. Continue. So surge, what are we talking about with that? Well, for the generally the southern portion of Lake Michigan, uh, will have some sort of northerly component to the wind. So wind out of the north or northeast or northwest that flows straight down the spine of the lake. And as you can see, Lake Michigan having its very long north to south axis, the long axis of the lake, winds right along that piles up a tremendous amount of water and wave energy that then piles up all that mass against the southern tip of the lake. You actually see a corresponding decrease on the lake levels up on the north when we have a storm surge. So in the more high-end events, we can actually see temporary storm-induced lake level rises of 1 to occasionally over 2 feet on top of what we're already seeing. Next slide, please. And then waves. We're looking for southern Lake Michigan, and it's going to vary for other parts of the lake. You know, the wave direction that's most impactful. So on the northern tip of the lake, you're looking for some sort of southerly component, but down here on the southern part of the lake, we're looking for northerly wind component that will result in storm surge, also drive those large waves. And the wave heights themselves are going to be determined by the magnitude of the winds and the direction and the duration of which they're blowing across the lake surface and the fetch of the wind. So if you have that ideal north to south fetch across the lake, that will drive the largest waves. And then the storm surge on top of that will compound the problem of these large battering waves because you'll have storm surge plus waves on top of it. Next slide, please. And just quick touching on lake levels themselves. So there's lake level monitoring, real-time monitoring that we have from a daily basis. For instance, Calumet Harbor, but then the Army Corps of Engineers has a weekly water level report that they put out for all the Great Lakes basins, and for here, we're the Lake Michigan Huron Basin. They're tied together. So right now, you can see on that graph there from the Army Corps of Engineers that we're at the red trace on we're at near record highs right now, and forecasts to remain very high in the winter, maybe just shy of records, but it's still quite high. So the high antecedent lake levels certainly increases the threat of and impacts from lakeshore flooding moving forward. Continue, please. So now we're just going to take a quick look at some of more significant events from last cold season. First one, we had March 6th, a fast-moving storm that brought a period of strong northerly winds with gusts as high as 45 miles per hour, peaking on the morning of Friday, March 6th. And that actually resulted in a period of 12 to 16-foot waves or higher over southern Lake Michigan. And you can see in that graphic there, the modeled wave heights, the highest waves were into northwest Indiana and far southwest lower Michigan. Next slide, please. There was actually a pretty short duration of the highest winds with this event, but despite that, we still observed a storm surge, and this is from Calumet Harbor of around 1.5 feet. Next slide, please. And here are some of the photos impacts. These are courtesy of the Chicago OEMC Office of Emergency Management and Communications. There was significant lakeshore flooding observed over southern Cook County. So when the winds are straight out of the north or even slightly west of north, southern Cook still gets a pretty good due northerly fetch, and even the far northern Cook County kind of gets that northerly fetch as well. So that can cause pretty significant lakeshore flooding impacts, and of course into northwest Indiana. Next slide, please. The January 10th, 11th, 2020 event was actually the event of the winter. It was more significant and damaging than the March event, and we had a storm surge of nearly 2 feet for this event as observed at the Calumet Harbor. Next slide, please. And this loop here is animation of the modeled wave heights, and they were modeled to have exceeded 20 feet, which is quite impressive. The most significant lakeshore flooding wind and wave events have wave heights of 20 feet or higher. There's a very long duration of extremely strong northerly winds. Some of them in excess of 50 to near 60 miles an hour. And this exacerbated lakeshore flooding because of the prolonged duration of the erosion and high storm surge. We actually had legitimate structural damage to some places along the shore, and the impacts were felt all the way from Wisconsin to Michigan. And if you could advance to the next slide, please. And did want to show a little bit of the messaging that we do for these events. This is from the January 10th, 11th event. This was put out early morning hours on January 10th. So looking at the January 11th timeframe, we were looking at those extremely high waves and talking about the potential impacts there and the bullet points, and also giving a timing of the worst conditions. And the other thing that we focus in on is not just the potential for significant impacts, is also for onlookers to stay away from the lake. Anybody walking up piers, jetties, breakwaters is just at risk from getting easily swept into the lake, and that's an extremely life-threatening situation. And also, we alert to take action to protect any lakeshore property that you can protect. Next slide. This is just an update of the same graphic. This was the morning of the most significant impacts. So we're looking at extremely high waves, 14, 18 feet, occasionally in excess of 20 feet, as I mentioned. And then also the potential for portions of Lakeshore Drive to be inundated. So, and again, we focus on the safety, stay away from the shore. Don't become an onlooker and become someone swept into the lake. And those are things that we do even for when the waves are not quite as high as that. We actually talk about that sort of messaging, just because any waves and how high the lake is can easily sweep people in. They get caught. They're not supposed to be swimmers, and they become swimmers in life-threatening conditions. And finally, you can advance to the next slide. And this is the final slide I have pretty much for the conclusions. So for beach hazards, elevated lake levels do increase the risk of impacts from dangerous rip currents, structural currents, other currents. And we issue beach hazard statements in the summertime to warn of dangerous swimming conditions. And we also, as I touched on the previous slide, along with messaging for dangerous conditions for onlookers, runners on the bike paths, people walking. So we recommend staying away during those times. They typically occur with moderate or strong onshore winds. Sometimes because of the high lake level era that we're in now, we do have lakeshore flood advisories in effect at the same time as beach hazard statements. That has occurred a couple of times over the past few summers. And next slide. And in conclusion, so this is my last slide. Elevated lake level is likely to persist through the upcoming winter into through 2021 probably. We've been in a recent stretch of dry weather, but possibly getting out of it already. More frequent precip this week and beyond. May have had a small impact on lake levels in the immediate near term, but in general, above average precip forecasts a return for winter 2021, supposed to be pretty active winter. And therefore, the lakeshore flooding risk will remain very high for the upcoming cool season. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have, and thank you for having me today. And again, I'll take any questions you might have in the next couple of minutes.
Perfect. Thanks, Ricky. We did receive one comment from Lori just saying that Wisconsin did receive a presidential disaster declaration for that January storm for public assistance. And then Mark has asked, or said, great graphics and photos. What channels does the Weather Service use to share these?
Those graphics will be on our website. Weather.gov is the homepage for all the offices. You could also go to mobile.weather.gov. That won't have the graphical content. Our website is weather.gov/Chicago /Chicago or LOT. And I would recommend clicking around the other offices as well to find their content. And we also post all of our graphical content onto social media as well. So in the case of lakeshore flooding events and also for dangerous swimming conditions, depending on the time of year, we'll post those graphics to highlight the potential impacts and also the main messages for people along the lakefront. So that we update those pretty frequently on Facebook and Twitter. I forgot to put my contact info in our social media channels on there, but at NWS Chicago is how you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. If you just search that, you'll find us. So we also are linked off of our website too for those.
Thanks. Yeah, you can also feel free to drop any of that info in the chat if you want, but I'll also say for me, I've definitely learned a lot from following the social media accounts, not just of the NWS Chicago office, but really all of the Great Lakes Weather Service offices have been very useful for me.
Yeah, they all do a great job with the graphical content as well. So we look to other offices as well for to help upgrade our own material as well. And they look at us, so it's kind of great to be part of this effort, especially considering where we're at with the lake level. So.
And then one other question, is the NWS crowdsourcing pictures of lakeshore flooding and impacts? How can partners contribute?
Oh yeah, definitely. Our email address is nws.chicago@noaa.gov. The other offices will have probably webmaster addresses on their public-facing websites, but that's how you can email to us. We certainly will take any photos of lakeshore flooding occurring or impacts from them to help document the events, because that's a really important part of this, being able to forecast them well and what may occur. One thing I forgot to mention about the January 2020 event is probably the most significant lakeshore flooding event in the region since probably February 1987. And we looked back at that event for news clippings and news clippings from then of what occurred and as to what may occur for this event. And the other thing is that we issued our lakeshore flood products earlier than we normally would, because it was a very consistent forecast in terms of the winds and waves. So we went ahead and we got the watch out really early, and it upgraded to a warning earlier than 24 hours out to get the earliest possible heads up to partners such as Chicago, OMC, and other emergency management agencies, towns, and municipalities with interests on the lake earlier than we had often do, because we were expecting a really high end event, and we did end up getting those. And then of course the photos and whatnot and reports that we got are help document their storm data, and they help us document these events and help us forecast better for the future events that we may see this upcoming winter. So yeah, certainly can email us those just to let us know if we have credit to use them in future graphics, or just as a source for documenting our events, top news stories, etc.
Perfect, thanks. And I think too, if you use social media, feel free to tag the offices if you have relevant pictures.
Oh, and that too, yeah. Certainly, social media. I forgot to, of course, yeah. I'm one of the social media program managers, and but yeah, you can tag us, send them directly to us, and we could accept them there, and obviously through email.
Great, thank you.